Night Pitch, Episode 6, just Wick, Evan Johnson. Evan, we've had lengthy discussions about equipment, just because that's what we do. We're baseball minds, we do our thing. We wanted to talk about gloves, because we've had plenty, and I want you to start off as far as the brand, the lineage, the progression through your career. What were the gloves that you used earlier in your career? Where is it that you go later? What do you favor in the glove that you use? Let's give you the floor. What's your go-to on your left hand?
Well, I've had a lot of different brands of gloves. In high school, I had a lot of Rawlings gloves. As I've got to play more, I kind of found that 44 was one of my favorite brands. The main ones, though, would be like a Rawlings, Wilson. You see a Nakona every now and then.
That's true. That's a good point.
Nike gloves are pretty rare, but they're there.
You get one. I've seen a couple Mizunos occasionally as well. Those will mix in a little bit.
I don't know how you get a hold of an Asics glove, but there are Asics gloves.
That's true. I think Yu Darvish uses one of those, if I'm not mistaken. That's a good point. That's amazing. I guess I never really thought about this, but when you think about the actual brands of gloves, particularly in the big leagues, I know that there's a list of MLB approved bats that if you go into like a big league locker room, you'll see the list of these are the bat brands that are approved for use in the big leagues. And the list gradually grows, but to my knowledge, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter for gloves, but for some reason you still see like the same 6 to 8 brands, and like there's maybe a few exceptions of like small doses, but for the most part, it's almost everybody uses one of those 6 to 8 brands of gloves.
Yeah, there's some that are more rare, obviously. And like a Nike, I'm pretty sure that you have to actually have a Nike deal to have the top quality Nike glove. And I know that if you can find a used one, they resell for, over $1,000. And which is crazy, but business. That's just how, it's a rare glove. So it resells that high.
Yeah, and I know that it's been particularly just with like supply chain issues of the kind of leather that you can get. I know that like maple versus ash bats, I've heard that preliminary discussion talking about how ash bats, that there isn't as big of a reserve of like MLB quality ash as there is MLB quality maple. So that's part of the reason that you don't really see ash bats being used in lower levels of, call it amateur ranks at that point. But I think as far as the glove conversation is concerned, I think that it kind of applies to the glove that I used to use. I was a Rawlings guy pretty much from high school all the way through college. And I had like a ox blood red, like a really deep red leather that, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they discontinued this because they could no longer get access to this kind of leather just because the color was as rich as it was. And my glove was like really heavy. So I went from using, like, when I finally got like my first legit glove that was the nicest thing ever, I couldn't believe how heavy the leather was. And that was always my preference until then you get to a school that has a glove deal, and I had to switch over to a Wilson glove for 2 years, and I couldn't believe how light it was. So I think of like the drills that you would do with a plyo in your glove to work on just rolling in your front shoulder and this kind of thing. I didn't even feel like I needed to do it just because my glove was as heavy as it was. But have you noticed anything like that as far as, has it been pretty consistent? Like when you've switched over to a different brand of glove, has there been anything that you've needed to get used to, or has it pretty much been an afterthought of it's just what's ever on your hand?
I don't really mind weight on my glove. I don't really mind if it's heavy or not, but I do notice when certain glove brands are heavier than others. But it also depends on the material, because a lot of, glove companies have different kinds of leather, different grades of leather, and some of them are heavier, more stiff, and some of them are, lighter and looser. I know Rawlings now is making these, I don't know what they are, but it's not leather on the back outer shell. It's like this moldable plastic material. And Wilson did this for a little bit too. They had I have one here. I brought out some gloves. But they had this material, I called it super skin, where it's supposed to be lighter than
like
leather.
The dots, like yeah. It's like the basketball type of leather,
yeah,
right?
It looks
like that kind of print on it.
Yeah. But like I know that 44s are pretty heavy, but I don't mind that. I'm sure there's some of them that are lighter. It depends on the leather that you choose, but mine that I have is really heavy. And then, like you said, the Wilsons, they're pretty light usually, so it varies.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting to see, like, especially the price range of. I know Rawlings Heart of the Hide, from what I've noticed, has been generally heavier than what the Pro Preferred is. So some of those will cost more than the others, but it's interesting to see how some big leaguers won't pick the most expensive model by default. Do you remember like the Rawlings Primo gloves that they used to sell with like the Italian leather?
Yeah,
Like 2007. What happened to those?
I
Did
don't
those
know.
you never see those anymore?
No, my buddy had two of them. He's in high school with me. He had two of them. He had a first baseman's mitt and then a regular glove, like an infielder's glove, and they were the maroon color, like the dark red, and they were the Rawlings
Yeah.
Primo. And I looked forever to try to find one of those, and I still can't. I love those.
It's funny. My glove color that I used was a dark red like that, but it was a Heart of the Hide. So I feel like I found the knockoff out of this. But I think it's amazing too. I thought those were like the most premier ones, and I wasn't sure if it was because they no longer had the leather to make them, or if they found out there was some study that they maybe weren't as good as they used to be. But I think that kind of launches an interesting discussion that I've thought about as far as like the accessibility of the game itself to where, my biggest complaint about gloves itself was that they were as expensive as they were. And like part of the reason I never really launched into a heavy discussion on it was because like I didn't want to just keep talking about spending more money when I didn't really want to have to spend money on something that maybe I didn't need to. And I mean that's part of why, I took care of it. I made sure I had a glove box. Well, I still have it on the desk somewhere. I won't go on a scavenger hunt for it, but the box that you put your glove in and you can set it up there. And some people, they'll put their glove on a laundry loop on their backpack or that kind of thing. But started to recognize, and you mentioned the 44 gloves of, I was skeptical at first. And then it was when you got one and you told me about the one that you had, that was when I pulled the trigger right there. Here we go. Um, but I started to kind of recognize how much more expensive gloves were for quality leather and how far were you going to spend on it as opposed to I felt like by using a 44 glove, I could feel better about if there was a kid that maybe was watching me play that liked the glove that I had that maybe wanted to emulate who I was. I could feel a lot more good about growing the game by using a glove that is it a lesser quality? I mean, by cost measures, yes, but at the same time, I felt like, making an impression for the next generation of the game of, yes, it's a couple $100 for a glove, but it's also a little bit less than what the other ones would be. So I know this was the incentive of like how Shaquille O'Neal launched his shoe brand and they're selling it in Walmart. His whole thing was I want it to be accessible so people can feel like what it feels like to be me, or at least to put my shoes on at that pace. So that's always been an interesting set of how do you grow the game. And I know that this is like discussing this on a very granular level, but that's part of the reason that I felt pretty fired up to at least pull the trigger with a 44 glove.
Yeah, 44s are a good deal. I mean, you get a lot of customization options with a 44 for a really high quality glove. And it's almost half price of that of like a fully custom Rawlings Pro Preferred, which would be like Rawlings' best leather. You can get the best leather that 44 has for half the price, fully custom with more options. So that's why I started using 44s instead. But yeah, gloves are expensive. I mean, people don't realize that really until they start to buy their kids like, oh, he needs a nicer glove because people are starting to throw harder and like this one just breaks.
Yeah.
They don't realize they run up to, 300, $400 or even $500. Or if you want a Nike used one, $1,000+. I remember
It's just ridiculous.
I was leaving spring training one time and I had to ship some stuff home because I couldn't fit it in my bag on the plane. And it was mostly baseball equipment. It was like 2 gloves, 2 pairs of cleats, a bunch of plyos, like some J bands and some other bands and things like that. And I walked into the UPS or the FedEx store and they put it all in a box for me. And the lady was asking like what the value of the box was. And she's like, so all this, she's like, what's the value? Probably, 50 to $100. And I looked around in there and I looked at her and I was like, probably like $3,000. And she's like, what? She sees like 2 or 3 gloves sitting in there and a couple pairs of cleats. I'm like, yeah, that's probably about $3,000. She has no reference about what like a nice glove costs.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's amazing as far as, especially when you look through some of the lower ranks of, I mean, it's something that you maybe might not even have that type of familiarity with it. And I think that's something when you look at like the care that goes into this. And I mean, you bring up a good point. I remember when I first got to junior college, I played JUCO ball in Arizona. It was for my first fall routine that it was well over 100 degrees. So you're sweating like none other. You're getting all that moisture into your glove, and I started to start seeing my glove cracking. I'm going, I'm not doing anything different. I'm still throwing every day. I'm still doing everything I used to do, but it's just that much more hot. And then I started to realize that, the kind of the trial by fire of you actually have to spend a whole lot more time taking care of your glove when you keep playing every day and when you're playing in more extreme climates. And that's the amazing thing when I started to like really resonate of what kind of glove am I looking to use. And it's not that I didn't want to skimp on, it's not that I wanted to skimp on anything, but it was more I wanted to familiarize myself with what can I do to make sure I can have a quality glove without feeling like I'm taking the field concerned about my glove. Like if you're thinking about this while you're competing, that's not exactly the right thing to do. So I think that leads into, I mean, you mentioned the customization options that 44 puts together. And when I was playing, I used a very natural color glove. I admit me not being so much in the competitive world of baseball anymore. I took the liberty to go mint green because, you're allowed to have fun with things when you're no longer having to follow the rules, I suppose. But I can think of Sean Manaea. He's with the Giants, and he used to be with the Oakland A's. He had a mint green glove, and I remember he used it for about 10 starts, and then on start number 11 or something like that, an umpire, as he's warming up, umpire says you can't use this because it's too close to the color of the ball itself. So he had to go run back into the clubhouse and grab a green glove. Have you seen anything of that likeness? I know that it's pretty common to have like a tan colored glove, and there's nothing really obscure on this. I know in the All-Star game, there's some leniency of, I saw a metallic silver glove on a pitcher in the 2021 All-Star game, that kind of thing. As far as maybe gloves that you've used or gloves that you've seen, what are some of the crazier ones that you've came across?
Um, I had a white glove when I was in high school that I would try to pitch with every game, and they would continue to tell me, "No, I can't pitch with it," but I would still try because I liked it. It was a Worth Liberty.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it was white and red. I know that in college you can't have like the two-tone uh, gloves, which I guess is two colors. I'm not sure. That gets pretty gray with how it's, what that even means. But everybody had a pretty solid colored glove. The glove I have now is a paisley pattern, and it's printed in, and then the raised part has like a kind of like a shiny gold dusted finish. So, and I saw that 44 is now doing clear gloves. They're not in the builder
I
yet.
saw
They're doing
that.
clear gloves. And obviously Rawlings has those ones with the plastic back. I call those ones the Rawlings Gen Z because they look very futuristic. So, I mean,
Goodness.
I haven't seen a lot of scenarios where guys get their glove, pulled from the game, unless it's got something on it that shouldn't be on it. But yeah, it's getting crazier. I think they're having a little bit more leniency with it because they just see so many different random colored gloves now. And my thought is, if I was using a white glove and wearing a white uniform, why can't my glove be white? I'm dressed in all white.
That's
Why
fair.
why does my
Yeah, that's a
glove
good
have to
point.
be tan? But I don't know. Never know.
I've often thought too, like with shift restrictions, you maybe can't take this generous decision at this point either. But the reason the hitter's eye exists is to make sure that there's a contrast. I've always wondered if you took the second baseman, if there's a left-hander on the mound with a shortstop with a right-hander, you position them literally right behind in line with the release point, and you have a white uniform blocking that thing, if that would ever work. But no, I mean, I've recognized different situations where that's happened, and I realize it's not particularly common. I remember when I was in Little League, I was probably like 10 years old at the time, but some kid was using just a standard Rawlings glove, and the around the wrist it has the Rawlings logo. It's pretty common with all of them, and the typical setup is like a white and red Rawlings. Well, the opposing team was complaining that there was too much white on the Rawlings strip. Yeah, there you go, right there. You can see the Rawlings name in white. This opposing team in this 10-year-old game was upset, saying it was too close to the color of the ball. And our coach walks over to them and says, "You realize like half of the gloves out here have white lettering that covers this." So the kid decides he's going to go back into the dugout, and he had a blue Sharpie, and he's filling in every single letter of Rawlings, and he's writing it in blue. And he kept using this for the remainder of the season at that point. But No, I think of the drastic sides of, I've always kind of been under the impression I didn't want to think about my glove while I was competing, and I never really wanted to have anything too flashy or too particular just because I felt like if I was thinking more about my uniform or something that I had on, it was going to distract from what it was that I was actually trying to do, which was just to get my job done. So, I mean, that was part of why I wasn't ever really a stirrup guy. I didn't really want to wear any chains, and I was pretty generic as a player as far as flashiness at that point. But I think that there's a lot more liberties going on, and I think that the other side of this is you see people putting custom logos on gloves, and colleges having these, and the way that the transfer portal is, and you see you can't really use your old college glove if you get picked up into the big league or into the minor leagues, because then people might razz you a little bit, or if you transfer to a new school, then you got to have a new glove until your school gives you a new one. I know when I was in the Arizona Fall League as an employee, there was a player, I forget where he was with and where he got traded from, but he had the team logo from the team that he was traded from 2 or 3 months prior on the glove that he was still currently using. You can't really abandon it because it's I mean, you could abandon it, but that's your glove. That's what you're broken in with. That's what you're familiar with. And now all of a sudden you're with a completely different franchise and you've got this stuck on your glove. But as far as some of the different logos that you've seen, I know that I've seen Australian players with the Australia logo or the flag on it. I've got the Colorado flag imprinted on the one that I have. Have you seen anything really obscure or maybe anything stitched in? If we're talking like extreme customization, what's some of the more wild things that you've come across?
Well, I know that some glove companies will, if you send them your logo, they'll print it on there as long as there's not any copyright issues. I haven't seen a whole lot of crazy stuff as far as being stitched in. I know that mine has a state of Iowa stitched in it, which a lot of people can't even see it. They don't even know what state it is. They're like, oh yeah, that's Idaho. Like, no,
Oh goodness.
nobody knows where it is. But a lot of times, especially, with it's summer ball and stuff, everybody's got something to do with their university on their gloves. So it's blue or red or orange or whatever. But I haven't seen anything too obscure. What I do see a lot of times is people who just have just a terrible like break-in strategy to their glove, or they've written on it or drawn on it or something of that nature that I'm just sitting there like, dude, you can't disgrace your glove like that. So bad.
When they write the phone number on it in case it gets lost, you're just like, come on, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as far as, I mean, you mentioned you put Iowa in there. Hey, only state that's bordered by a river on the east and west. Hey, don't be mistaken that state outline. There you go. Um, I know there was a kid that played at the University of Texas, and I don't know how I remember this in particular, but he was from Italy, and he had the Italian flag right next to the Texas Longhorns. And I was going, that's actually pretty awesome that they let him do that. So I know there's different wild kind of sets that go together, but I think as far as like expanding on the equipment setups of, I remember when I would play in summer ball against a kid that went to Oregon, you knew he went to Oregon just based on the arm sleeves and the batting gloves and the cleats that they would wear.
Oh yeah.
And I think that I mean, it's understood and that's the way it is. But I remember I wanted to have a familiarity just on where does this guy go to school. It doesn't really matter, but I'm curious, where is it? And anytime you saw one of them, you instantly knew that's just the way that it goes. But I know that as far as the general upkeep, and this is something that, I mean, I'll pull you on this just because you've had plenty more experience with this than I have. What does the glove care? We've talked a lot about arm care and how you take care of yourself as a competitor, but how routinely, I know like Wilson Pro Stock is a good like oil that you can put on your glove. I know Nakona has some other variants that they can put together. What are some things that you maybe put on your glove? What do you do to take care of it? And how often do you really set the time aside to take care of the glove that you're wearing?
No, you put oil on it. You put conditioner, right? You can clean it. There's like leather cleaner. But usually you don't need to find like a glove specific oil or like a glove specific cleaner to do your glove with. You can just go to, buy the shoes in Walmart and they'll have all sorts of leather care stuff. I was actually talking today to a lady at Shields. If you're from the Midwest, you know what Shields is. It's a sporting goods store. Big one. And she was looking at gloves and I was just kind of walking through with a coffee looking at gloves too. And I could see her like trying to figure out which one to get. And I'm like, I know she's getting this for Christmas, for her son or whatever. So I was talking to her about it. She's picking them up And she's like grabbing off the wall and she's going, she's like
Oh,
pushing on it
dear.
like this, right? Like flat. And I just I was like, yeah. She's like, so how do I break him in? How do I, get it so it's good for him? And I was like, okay, so, well, first off, and I kind of like put my hand, I was like, you don't want to squeeze it like a book. She goes, oh, okay, got it. And then like, we keep talking about how to take care of it and like building a good pocket, right? Like, which is back in there, like getting a deep pocket, but keeping everything else stiff so it, has a good life. But then as she's talking, she keeps like going like this, and she keeps forgetting that she's not supposed to do this. So she'll like squeeze it and go, "Oh crap, not supposed to do that." I'm like, yeah, don't do something to like where you run it over with I've seen people like put it underneath their car like flat. It's not supposed to be like a book. It's not supposed to do this. It should stay like this, right? You catch like that. You do not want to like a flat pancake book looking glove. And if ever you got all these gloves, like this one just sits like this, right? But it's got a really deep pocket. This is broken in pretty good, right? And when I squeeze it, right, the ball does most of the work, and that's for a lot of you guys already know this stuff. But this is just what I was talking to the lady about in Shields, because she was talking about glove care, and they had oil and stuff there, and I told her get some of that, get a mallet, because if he's young, if he's 10. Use the mallet, break in a pocket, but do not fold it. Do not, do that thing where you put a ball in it and wrap it like a belt. Just throw a baseball into it. That's it, and you'll have a better version of a broken glove.
There's nothing worse than just seeing on the dugout bench just something that's just as flat as the metal that's on the bench at that point.
So brutal. I hate.
I know. I had a case. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sad too, because it's one of those things that you don't really know about this until you've had the experience working with the glove itself. I know if I take mine, like I have a box for mine, and this company the company was the Glove Box Company. That was literally what they were. And I don't think they're around anymore, but I set it in this box. It's got a lid on it, and I put it in my duffel bag. And if I set my glove here, it doesn't, like, this is how it is. If I just set it anywhere, it just sits like this. So it's got a pocket. It's broken in. It takes care of itself as far as, it's broken in. It just happens to have a lot more shape than the average glove does. And particularly being a pitcher I just like feeling my fingers like kind of curling in just like this, as far as it helps me kind of feel like I'm getting into my rotation. And I like having that firm, which is part of the reason I didn't really want to break it in with the pocket so much on the fingers itself, just because kind of a kinematic awareness of feel of just what I was trying to generate. So I know there's other elements of feel of people talking about having their string really long, like the laces like this.
Tie wash. Anyways.
It kind of is. I like it because it sounds cool. That's the only reason I kind of have mine long. As a matter of fact, this is actually longer than I remember. I thought these were actually shorter, but I'm looking at them now.
When I was talking to the lady,
I know, like.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. No, you're good. Go ahead.
When I was talking to the lady in the store, I was showing her like the glove, and I was holding it like this and like talking about like how to form it, and she goes, "Wait, why is your hand in it like that?" And if people don't know, if you can see, right, I'm missing a finger, so it seems. But this is how a lot of people wear their gloves when people start to throw harder.
Yeah.
You wear it like this, which this finger, I can barely get it in there like that. But you wear it like this, you're going to get your pointer finger worn out. Now, if you slide it over, if you put two fingers over here in this slot, now this finger becomes part of the pocket, the whole pocket itself, right? Where is it? There it is. Becomes part of the whole pocket. So now you have a bigger pocket, and like this gap right here where that, geez, I can't figure this out, where this finger hole is, it's closed. Like there's no space to put my finger in there because this finger is now part of the pocket. So a lot of people you'll see on TV, like pitchers, you'll see them like set up like this. You can see that they don't put their finger in that main hole. Or if they do, it's out. Because you just can't wear that kind of like velocity on your hand all the time. So even catchers will do it. You get catcher's mitts, and this one's formed just the same, but the finger's out, right? Or you can slide it over even and go like this if you wanted to.
You could slide it over and go the finger out still if you wanted to go super deep too.
Yeah, if you wanted to really get away from that sucker, there you go. Some people hold it like that too, but That's a thing that maybe people might not know. And she was confused as to why I had my hand in the glove like that. And I was like, oh, that's just habit. He'll start to do it. I bet he will if he starts playing for long enough.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as far as the differences in positions too. You know, you talk about the age difference of as you progress and what higher velocities will kind of force you to do. But I think as far as the positions around the field, if you see an outfielder, I know it's pretty typical that some outfielders will prefer to flare out their thumb and their pinky of like bending this outward to give them an even wider tip of the glove itself. And then some outfielders, they won't break their glove with their entire hand in the glove. Like they will have part of their hand facing out, so that way it gives them extra length on the top of their glove, which means if they're going to reach for balls in the outfield, that means this glove is an even bigger extension on what you're looking to do. So the standard ones, and I know any ball player will probably know this already, but middle infielders typically have smaller gloves just because if they're turning a double play, it's easier to get the ball out of the glove and take care of it. Outfielders will routinely have a lot bigger glove, and those are sometimes you'll look at like the 13-inch gloves. Of course, first baseman will have a lot more flat of a glove itself, just more of a pocket intended for primarily just catching because that's what they're really going after. Are you pulling out a glove that corresponds to every position that I'm shouting out right now?
Yeah, I forgot the outfielder one in there though.
Oh goodness. I forgot you're doing like a live demonstration as I'm speaking this. This is incredible. Yeah. But I think the other difficulty of as far as, when you're a utility player and you have to carry more than one glove, it's typical that maybe if you see a player switching positions as part of a pitching change, I guess you saw it more when National League pitchers were still hitting and they'd sub somebody out and adjust and double switch. But you'll see maybe an outfielder come in to go play first base and they'll switch out an outfielder's glove for a first baseman's glove. And part of being a utility player is, if you have reps at all over the field, there's a good chance that you could be carrying up to 3 gloves at any point in time. And then even otherwise, I know some pitchers that will prefer to have a glove that they shag BP with. And you'll sometimes see some of the more crazy designs. If you show up to a game for batting practice and you take a look and you observe the pitcher's gloves, you might see some more wild colors out there. And then when the game starts, those gloves get put away and their game gloves come together. So have you ever put anything like that into practice, or have you always just been kind of a one glove guy at the ballpark as a pitcher anyways?
Well, usually I have one glove that I use and then one glove that I'm trying to cycle into use. So I use the glove in the game that's more broke in, that I can squeeze better. And then, if I have a glove that's brand new and I want to break that in, then I'll use that for like BP catch just till it starts to get broke in. Because if it's too stiff and I get like a slow roller come back or ground ball, like that's the toughest thing to do is field a slow moving ball with a really stiff glove. Takes a little bit of juice to kind of like really make it squeeze, really make it, pop.
The last thing you want to do is find out that you're handcuffing yourself by not being able to put that together.
Yeah.
But I guess the other side of advice that I have for people is, if you're thinking about your glove while you're competing, that's not what you want to do. And I think that so much of it comes down to the comfort side of, there's different, if you go into any like custom glove builder online, you'll see the different variations of how you can create this, how you can get this type of feel. What are things that you're really looking for and to develop a preference? And I mean, it's no different than what kind of bat that you're looking to use or what kind of car you want to drive, what kind of pencil you like writing with, those types of things. But, the criteria, it's a very expensive criteria, but all the while the end goal is to make yourself feel as comfortable as you possibly can. And then you get to show a little bit of creativity. If you want to put the Iowa State on there, you're good to go. You get a little outline and you're all set. So, Evan, you got anything else for us? You got any final thoughts on the glove discussion right here?
Yeah. Don't treat your glove like crap. Don't turn it into a pancake because this is not the ideal position to catch the ball in. Leave it rest like this. Right? Up.
It looks good, man.
Do not do the things that you see on the internet. Go run their gloves over with their car and stuff. Just leave it how it is.
What are you? This is what I didn't ask this, but now that you bring that up, I've heard some people that'll put their glove in an oven and like try to get it like warm so they can mold it better. You've talked about running it over with a car. I've heard putting it in a Ziploc bag and putting it on the dashboard of a car to get it ready to go. which all are things that I would not recommend doing. Just not a good idea. I mean, you meant the mallet. That's classic. Take the mallet and go. Take a ball and go. Go sit behind a pitching machine and just catch if you need to. I know when I would play long toss, that was when I loved breaking in gloves, just because you're getting some serious pop on longer throws. So, like the actual break-in process, you mentioned the mallet. Is there anything that you would recommend staying away from in addition to those aforementioned details?
Play catch with it. If you really are concerned about it, just play catch with it. Don't do anything else. Oil it when it starts to get dry. But if you can look at this glove and tell, where do I usually catch the baseball with this glove, and it's right here, because you know that just by looking at it, then you probably broke it in the right way, right? It should look something like this. The pocket should look something like that. Right? And if you keep messing with it, keep bending it and doing all this stuff to try to make it looser, it just takes time. Just keep using it, and then eventually it'll form exactly how it should form.
Chances are if it's hard to break in, that means it's a good glove. Like, that's another side of it that I think some people might not know.
Correct.
But, there's some places that have, some people will say they have it like pre-broken in gloves, which, I mean, there's a lot of noise and complications there. I don't know if that's always advisable. I think that the cool way to do it is, the sentimental value of the glove is a lot richer as far as if you actually went through the entire break-in process. Chances are then you're going to take care of it more because you realize the labor that actually went into it. So that's my biggest recommendation. Have some fun with it, man. And that's part of the cool part of it. You know what? It's part of your identity as a baseball player. It's what you go to war with every single day, and that's how you create it. That's what you go have a good time with. So now that you guys get to see mine every single day as part of the backdrop, I suppose. Evan, you're getting a lot more use out of yours, so I'll just keep mine looking like a prop for the majority of the time hanging out. But take care of your gloves. That's the final message. That's the first in the equipment series, and we'll see how it rolls. So we're going to take a quick break. It's going to be a lot shorter than how long it takes to break in a glove, but we'll be right back. This is The Night Pitch. Thank you very much for tuning in. Episode 6. We'll be right back. Hello friends. Baseball park factors are numbers that can show how a ballpark itself can impact performance. When you hear the terms pitcher friendly or hitter friendly, these terms can be measured using actual numbers. The basic idea of park factors is to compare what happens by a team at home and on the road. If we calculate this by hand, let's say in 1 year a team hits 100 home runs at home and allowed 95 at home. In that same year on the road, let's say they hit 90 on the road and allowed 91. With a 1 year sample size of games, that's 81 home and 81 road games in the big leagues, now we've got everything we need to come up with the home run park factor. Simply put, this number is a direct comparison to home and road outcomes. Any park factor above 1 means something happens more often than average. Anything below 1 is below average. In the case of a home run park factor, anything above 1 indicates a hitter-friendly ballpark for home runs. A high park factor on home runs suggests maybe a ballpark at altitude, maybe some history of some heavy winds blowing out, maybe some short fences, or a combination. Park factors can be calculated for all sorts of things, whether it be base hits or even pitching averages. Whatever statistic is being used, home and road is stacked up against each other to isolate the variables of one ballpark. Welcome back, my friends. Returning from the intermission. Evan, we've talked about gloves and we now want to talk about baseballs, which is something that the casual fan probably has no reason to even think about this just because it's the ball itself. It's just what you play with. It is what it is. The NBA has a very standard basketball that they use, the NFL very standard. Of course, all of those are handmade in their own distinct ways, but when you're talking about a baseball being hand-stitched and when you're talking about the different regulations that go into it, your experience of, playing in the NCAA ranks, playing in different summer settings, and then playing in the minors and different levels of the minors. I know that you've mentioned kind of in detail the differences in the actual seams at the levels that you've participated in.
Yeah, as you go up, the seams start to get smaller in terms of height, and then the ball starts to get more firm. Goes further when it's hit or whatever, and it's harder to spin. Usually, some people prefer to spin. They prefer spinning with those big league balls that have the way lower seams, which I don't mind either way. But there is a stark difference between like a NCAA ball and a like a upper level minor league ball, like a AAA ball. And a lot of people wouldn't know picking it up, but if you're somebody who has played a lot, somebody who in college will pick
Yeah.
up like a big league ball and go, "Geez, like that's got to be hard to grip," you know?
It feels like a cue ball in your hands when you're picking up a major league ball. Well, I remember like when I was really young, I went to a big league game and I got a baseball during batting practice or something. And I remember you take it home and maybe you're comparing it to the baseballs that you use and feeling the difference in your hand of the raised seams. And this was something that I thought was really interesting. I really liked the NCAA baseballs and the seam, like the height on those I felt were ideal as far as like the feel that I wanted to have on my pitches. You're just gonna pull one out for every example that I have. Is that how we do it?
Oh yeah, I'm
You've just got
prepared.
them ready and waiting. You had the gloves waiting, and now you got the different baseballs ready.
Yeah.
I know that, I mean, for the most part, every baseball that I used in college kind of had a similar seam height. And, as you continue to progress, just like you mentioned, I think that it's interesting to see kind of the history behind it and why it is what it is. So I know for the average baseball player, maybe this is readily understood, but the reasons that the seams are lower in the big leagues is because it's harder to generate movement if there's less seam to actually fight the air. So if you throw a heavy breaking ball, if the seams are taller, that means they're going to interrupt the air and it's going to cause more break, as opposed to if the seams are flatter, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So this is a side of, part of the reason big league pitchers are truly as good as they are. I mean, yes, it's because they're at the pinnacle of the sport itself, but when you look and see how technical it gets, even down to the equipment, which is something that I don't think many people recognize on that level if you haven't picked up a big league ball and compared it to other baseballs, of a lot easier to hang a breaking ball if the seams are a little bit lower. It's a little bit more challenging to have the discipline to show up every single day with your best stuff when maybe you don't exactly have those extra few millimeters on your fingers in order to get consistently the break that you're looking for. So I want to touch on, you actually were called up for a week in, I believe it was 2019, if I'm not mistaken, of you filled in AAA, and that was when you mentioned using the AAA baseball. Was there any thoughts that went into your mind of when you were warming up in the bullpen or when you were in that actual game itself of, were you thinking about the baseball or was it easy just to kind of handle it as just another routine outing? Was there any interruptions because of the ball itself?
No, I mean I wasn't thinking about it, but there is a big difference. You can tell there's a big difference. I'm not sitting up there thinking about it, but there is a difference.
Sure.
They're a lot harder. Just the feel of them it doesn't feel as, squishy. They almost feel harder and they feel a little bigger. Probably because you don't have that like depth that comes with, makes
Yeah.
it feel smaller when the seams are higher. But when they get hit hard, they go really really fast because there's not a lot of. I would say that when you're talking, well, the difference between a big league ball and a minor league ball, like a lower level minor league ball, is a lot of people feel they can throw them harder than the minor league ball. Which it makes sense in my head that if you have, less seams to contribute to drag, then it would cut through the air better. Now, I mean, that's the opposite for creating movement, right? But think about like a golf ball and how those are engineered, right? They're engineered to create like more of a boundary layer to reduce drag so that they don't spin off course as much. And they're really smooth and they have those dimples that cut in everywhere. They have a baseball and there's high stitches. It's not going to fly, it's not going to cut through the air as good as something with lower stitches. And it's just crazy to me that players will sit there and say that based off eye test alone. They're like, I feel like I could throw this ball a lot harder, but I don't, it doesn't move as much. And they're not doing that based off data. They're just doing that based off feel, which is, impressive to hear people say. It's just how attuned they are with the baseball.
Yeah, it's funny too, especially like the perceptions that exist in within pitching too. And I know this definitely exists in hitting, but I can think of my own pitching days of the depth of the backstop behind the catcher itself. It was a really deep backstop. I felt like sometimes I wasn't able to just. It felt longer. There's been mounds that I've stood on where it seems like when I'm standing on the mound, it's a shorter distance to home plate, and it's all based on the perception of what is it right behind the catcher? How deep is that there? How quickly do the stands jut up from there? And that was part of why I always kind of wanted to step on every mound that I was going to pitch on before I actually pitched on it, just to have that visual familiarity. But with the baseballs itself, and this is something that I think dating back to, when you play in higher levels, you have more of a consistent ball. If you're playing in the NCAA, every single game that you play in is going to be with the same NCAA branded stamped baseball with standardized seam height, or at least as standard as hand stitched can be. When you're playing in like different tournament settings, or if you're playing exhibition games in high school and one team brings one case of baseballs, another team brings another, I can think of, it seemed like every single game growing up in Little League, you're using a different seam height. And especially as you start developing that familiarity of how to get in tune with your body, there's a brand new variable of you get like an old school raised seam, like the 2007 ones that just feel like it's like a tectonic plate colliding with each other on your finger. I know of those, and I know of that was the way that the NCAA balls used to be prior to. I know when the BB Core bats were released and they found out how dead the BB Core bats truly were, they had to change and modify the baseball itself to offset how different the bats were. So I can recall, I think it was the first year that the College World Series moved into TD Ameritrade Park. I have a baseball from that year, and to see how big the seams were on that, which was 2011, and then as I was playing in college, the same type of baseball, the NCAA ones that existed, and how much lower the seams were. I think that it's interesting to see just how the history of the game itself can impact this. And I also know there was a study that was released. A guy named Barton Smith. He's a physics professor at Utah State, and he's done a lot of studies with the people with driveline. He's done a lot of independent research. Laminar wake or laminar flow. That's a technical word. I know that we're getting really scientific. He's one of the leading professors that really dives into those types of things. So he did a study trying to figure out different seam heights and how it affects different things. And he had a sample of big league baseballs that he received. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but down to the millimeter to see how different the seam heights were on different balls that were standardized, ready for big league use. These baseballs are hand stitched, and it's hard to come up with a standardized set. But I think what surprised me the most was seeing how big the range was from the highest seams to the lowest seams, even at the big league level. So here it is where it's such a touch and feel of wanting to be consistent, and you've got a lot of different limbs moving as a pitcher where consistency is always going to be desired. But it's amazing to see, even if it's intended to keep things the same, every so often you're going to have a baseball that just feels like a grapefruit in your hand, and you're going to have one that just feels like you're holding a dart and you're ready to go. And I feel like that can change whenever the umpire reaches into their pocket, and that's kind of the way it is, and that's how you develop your touch and feel as a pitcher, which it's just another crazy reality that you have to deal with in this game.
Yeah, I mean, these guys have been playing for so long. You watch a major league game where the pitcher gets the ball back, doesn't like it, throws it out, gets another one, doesn't like it, throws it out. It's like that. Those differences in those baseballs that they don't want might be just millimeters, right? Or just might feel funky in their hand, or they just might be trying to annoy the umpire. You never know. Could be one of those three things. But those are the minor differences that come with the baseball being hand stitched, and that's the experience level of the people who are playing that can throw a big league ball, then throw a lower level minor league ball and go, yeah, I feel like that one moves faster through the air than the other one. Whereas like the average person who hasn't played their entire life would be like, these baseballs are exactly the same. But some player might find them just vastly different.
Yeah, it's interesting too, taking a lead on how the ball can change over the course of a game. And I've heard like the average life of a big league baseball in an actual big league game is like 6 different pitches too. So it's not like you're having a consistent thing that you go to work with all the time. I know that if you watch an NBA game, there's very few exceptions that the ball will change at all over the course of an entire contest. Whereas, a pitcher, if it's a 15 pitch inning, they're probably seeing at least 3 different balls in circulation. And, my favorite was there might be a double off the wall and the baseball stays in play. But if it one hops or skips the catcher, they have to cycle it out. That was always my favorite that you see. And you see it quite a bit. But the differences in the ball itself, and I mean, just to see the creativity that sometimes comes into the baseballs. I know that, you having played in different levels, the NCAA baseballs used to have kind of like a royal blue stamp on them. They transitioned to more of a navy blue. Major League Baseball uses a navy blue stamp, as do the minors. I know special occasions like Mother's Day, there'll be a pink stamp, and they've even used pink seams before. I can think of a couple that I've used that have had colored seams, like the NBC World Series in Kansas uses red and blue, and I remember throwing those before. And the Northwoods League has green, which was a little bit of a difference that I'd never thrown a green stamped ball before. Have you seen, for the most part, it's typically blue, if I'm not mistaken. I'm almost unanimously across the board with few exceptions. But is there any weird baseballs that you've thrown over the course of your career?
Well, to touch on something you said before that question, and I'll get to that question, but we were just talking about how the life of the baseballs isn't very long. I remember certain scenarios where, because in the lower levels of the minor leagues, they're less consistent than like, the ones that you get at the higher levels. But when I get a ball thrown to me and I really like that ball and I had it for like 4 pitches, sometimes in the game, if the guy fouled it into the stands, I was kind of like, oh, dang, I really like that ball. Like actually in the game thinking like, crap, I like that ball. Dang it. And then they throw me another one and I'd feel it around and be like, okay, yeah, this one's fine. But that actually happens. They hit it in the stands and you're like, oh shoot, that ball was a good one. But as far as weird baseballs, I think, well, most of the time that's just navy blue. I think pretty much everyone is navy blue. I think the little leagues are black, but those are just kind of more like rubber coating instead of leather sometimes, just to increase the life of the ball. Because if you're in a little league game, they don't throw a ball out every 6 pitches. One or two baseballs the whole game. But yeah, the NBCs are pretty cool because they have the alternating color laces. Northwoods is green, and then I actually have a baseball that I think is pretty cool. A 2020 spring training ball, very rare because if you're not, and I guess Justin can tell you why this is a rare baseball to have.
Man, the 2020 says it all right there, dude. Spring training, like that was the spring training that almost never existed right there, man. I remember, that's funny you mentioned that because I think 2016 was the first year that MLB decided they were going to do custom spring training balls. And just to add on your story of this, the baseballs that they had in Florida, they had like a highway sign with FL for Florida and AZ for Arizona. And they custom put these together. If you show up to a spring game and you're seeing these different logos, and that's what they used. So the 2020 balls was, I don't know, the 4th or 5th rendition of them actually having custom spring training baseballs. And to my knowledge, which I've spent plenty of time in spring training venues since 2020, but to my knowledge, that was the final year that they actually had spring training branded baseballs. And I can only help but wonder because I'm sure there's a warehouse somewhere that has a stockpile of 2020 spring training balls because half of those big league spring training games were never played just because COVID shut the world down and those games were never mixed in, and you can't really go and use those the next year if they've got a date on them. So that's a pretty good one. I can think of some of the more unique ones that I've seen or that I've come across of Major League Baseball's postseason. They'll have gold stamps on them. Pretty standard of they'll have it branded saying postseason, and then the World Series baseballs are always pretty cool with gold stamps. The All-Star game is some of the more unique ones that are there because the seam colors will actually be different. I know when it was in Los Angeles, they used the red and blue. When it was in Seattle just this past summer, they used like a navy blue and a teal. That's historically always been the case, and you always get lucky when you run into one of those because like in 2005, I believe, when it was in Pittsburgh, they had black and yellow seams on an actual baseball, which it's my dream long term. I want to get custom branded night pitch baseballs where we get like the black stamp of our logo and we have like cream and black on the actual Rawlings big league balls.
That would be cool.
If all goes to plan and we can build a really fancy set with like a batting cage, that's the baseballs that I want to try to get moving.
Yeah.
But I know I grew up in Colorado, and this is another side of the different seams. Denver hosted the All-Star game in 2021, and it was originally supposed to be hosted in Atlanta. And it was switched from Atlanta to Denver in April of that year, which it's a whole political discussion that, read some news articles if you want to know why. But anyways, Denver was given pretty much 3 months, maybe 4 months to prepare for hosting the game itself. And I was all excited going, yeah, they're going to have a really cool baseball. It might be purple and green. It might be purple and silver. This is what the ball's like. Their seams on the 2021 All-Star Game ball were all red. And I'm thinking it's because they didn't have enough time to custom make them to Colorado. So like you see the chart, you see like a wall full of different All-Star game balls, and there's only one in like the last 20 years that hasn't had a fancy color on it, and it was the one in Colorado. That's where I grew up, and I was all bummed out, going, "Yeah, I wanted to get one of those," but it's all part of it. It's understood, but no, it's cool. I know. I think the Frontier League is another league that uses red and blue, which I mean that can get pretty fancy as well. But you never know what you're going to run into. I think it's amazing just to see the differences in feel and the differences in awareness of how something feels in your hand. But it just goes to further solidify how some of the most precise people that I've met happen to be the ones that are in tune with how fine a different ball. I mean, yeah, you lose one in the stands and you're a little bit bummed out about that. I don't really know many other fields other than baseball that you're going to see something quite like that.
It's true. That's pretty unique to happen, and it's fun because sometimes I've gotten a baseball before where it'll come back to me and it'll feel in my hand as if one of these four seams, right? There's one there, there, and over there. One of those is raised versus all of them. So I don't like favor throwing like a curveball or a fastball off of the one that I feel more is more raised, so I get more leverage. And you kind of like you get it back, and you're like, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, this feels comfortable. This is like the best spot, right? And then you lose it in the stands, and that's just a part of the game. I don't know in basketball or in football, where a time where the ball goes in the stands, you're like, dang it, I was making so many shots with that basketball. It's gone. Now fans taking it home.
It's funny. I can remember a story that I heard that involved Kobe Bryant, and he was taking shots on just pregame, getting familiar, shooting by himself. And he goes to like somebody that was working the arena, and he said, "The rim's a quarter inch too low." And he went away for about 10 minutes, took a water break. Their staff came in and they raised the rim to exactly 10 feet. And all of a sudden he starts making everything that he was missing. I mean, he maybe wasn't missing a ton, but the fact that he knew on a 10-foot rim that it was a quarter of an inch too low. And I mean, I'm sure it gets magnified through the lure of who it was and the instance of how things went together like that. But, I know musicians that get familiar with, maybe there's a piano player that has to get used to something new. That's a little bit more of a huge difference that you got to adapt to. But some people bring their own instruments to avoid this kind of thing. I think that especially with pitchers, you have the norm of understanding this, whereas with hitters, you're a lot more familiar with the bat that you have in your hands. But even then, if you're using a different type of bat, you might break one that feels really good in your hands. I can think of it's pretty common that you'll see pink bats for Mother's Day that they'll approve. And I always enjoyed if you watch a couple days after the Mother's Day games, and every so often you'll still see a player using a pink bat because they really like how it felt in their hands.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what the color is. It feels great right now. But, you run into some unique situations whenever you have unique equipment like that. But I think that's part of the fun of it all. And I think that's part of the joy of, in the minors, and I know you can attest to this, of the way it used to be, of the different leagues had different stamps, and you might be taking batting practice at a certain venue, and you'll run into leagues with different stamps based on how they're divided through. I always enjoyed college summer ball because you'll see the batting practice bucket, and it's not always the bucket of the league balls that you're playing with. Sometimes the NCAA balls will get mixed in from the differences in backgrounds. So I know that it's kind of a collector thing that a lot of college players will like to try to collect as many different conference stamps as they can. So the SEC has their own, the Pac-12 has their own, all the way down through the ranks of, I know Division I is that way. Is there any, you mentioned the 2020 baseball, do you have a collection of unique stamps, or is there any that you really come to mind in addition to that 2020 ball that you have?
I'd say the 2020 spring training ball is probably one of my favorites, just because it's so, like, I don't feel like there's a lot of those anywhere. But I do have a small collection of conferences. I don't have an SEC ball, but I have a lot of different NCAA conference baseballs. I don't have all of them, but a couple of teammates I remember were trying to collect all of them and did. I think there's a kid named Preston Church that I'm good friends with, and he had collected all of them, and he put them in like a case, just with all the Division I conferences, which is pretty cool. Because where else are you going to get that, other than actually being there and trying to get one wherever you go? But I think the beauty.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think the beauty of baseball is that, let's say you go to a basketball game, when do you get a souvenir that's free? That's that rare, right? You go to a baseball game, there's 30, 40 souvenirs thrown out. and more if you include outfielders throwing balls into the stands and all that stuff. That's one of the beautiful things about baseball is that you have, these which they use a ton of that you can go home with if you go to a game. Not a lot of sports have that. Not a lot of sports have that at all.
The instant connection to it, I think of like the involvement of growing the game. And that's actually a really good point that you bring up as far as part of the reason that I think the game is so celebrated up and down is because of how close you can feel like you're actually a part of the action if you're just a fan showing up. And I think part of that is the elements of playing every single day. Yes, the schedules are a lot more intensive, but that's part of the lure. And I know that, it's always exciting when you're a player and you can flip the ball up to a kid. When you reach that level of, I mentioned before, what are like the milestones when you can consider yourself a big time baseball player? And I've said when they wash your uniform for you, when they sell actual ticketed games, when like they have the actual name of the game itself on ticket stubs, that's another one. And the other milestone I feel, or one of them on that long list, is when you can truly earn the right to flip a baseball up to somebody. And I remember the first couple times that I did that where I was like, I've been on the receiving end of this, and now all of a sudden I get to be the one distributing that type of thing. And, I will say, as far as the first couple times that you get to do that, it's just as gratifying as a player as it is when you're a kid being able to see those types of things. So it keeps you connected. Do you have any good ones when you've tossed something up? When you've tossed anything up to somebody, or is there crazy things that you've exchanged with fans for baseballs?
I haven't done much exchanges. I usually favor kids when I throw baseballs into the stands. I will always look for a kid or give it to a dad with a little kid, because that was when it meant the most to me. And I remember like going to big league games with my dad, and my dad like just putting a ton of time and effort into getting a ball from a player to give to me, right? And now you get to do that, and I'm just not going to chuck it in the stands. Like, I'm going to go find a kid that looks like he's very invested in the game, who one isn't asking me for a baseball, but just kind of like looking.
That's a good point,
right? If that little kid's just sit there looking and he's watching and he's paying attention, and you can tell he's just kind of shy. That's the number one target for me to give the baseball to, because he's into the game, he likes it, but he's not in your face about, I just want a ball just to have a ball. You really make somebody, and you're right. That's one of the most gratifying experiences of getting to do that back when you were in that position before and you got a big league ball and you're like, no way. Right? Or any kind of ball above high school, you're like, no way, this is so cool.
That's a good point, because I mean, the first time that I got a baseball and I looked and I saw that the big league logo was actually on the ball itself, I remember thinking that was the coolest thing ever. And I mean, that's what really launches the discussion into, people collecting these. I mean, it's the inner kid in you of when you look at a baseball and you see this. And I can remember, my first couple college games where I looked and I saw the conference logo and I'm like, I'm actually playing at this level. And I mean, you progress through of, I'm sure seeing the minor league logo in that same capacity, and you're making a big league debut and you grab, the first pitch that you throw in the big leagues, you look and you see that and you realize that ball could be, I mean, you're not going to toss your debut ball into the stands necessarily, but realizing the sentimental value of what that ball means to the player making their debut, and the sentimental value of, there could be a third out to a first baseman that he catches it and tosses it into the stands, and that ball is going to mean a whole lot to somebody. And I think of the tangible recognition of what this game is able to give different people, and that's part of the lure of baseball cards. That's part of the lure of ticket stubs. I get digital ticketing is kind of killing that right now, but I think there's a lot to be said about the baseball discussion itself, ranging from the sentimental value to what the pitchers look for to what the touch and feel is in a pitcher's hand. And we just up an entire segment talking about something that you can hold just with a couple fingers. That's pretty impressive, man.
Yeah, and I think that the sentimental value of a baseball can range from something where you obtain that ball and you're escorted out by security very quickly, right? Or it can be something that you lose in your bag. The range of importance of the baseball is, either it dependent on the environment or dependent on the experience of the person. Because I could throw, a minor league ball to a kid in the stands, and if he's never got one before and he takes it home and he puts it in his room, like up on the shelf, that ball was just like in circulation in the game and nobody really cared about it. But now it's on a shelf at somebody's house. It's all about that
Yeah.
perspective. And it's crazy that that's the only sport I can think of that has that much memorabilia that comes out of the game and is directly given to the fans would be like hockey, maybe, where they hand sticks and like sometimes there's an errant puck that goes in the stands, but not as often as baseball. And certainly, if you get a puck that goes in the stands in a hockey game, they're likely not escorting you out by security. You know,
It's always good. I like the negotiations when somebody hits their first career home run, and then it's like the discussion of what do you want in exchange for the ball. I always wanted to be on the receiving end of that, but I always wanted to just be the one to hand it back to them. Like I thought to myself, all right, maybe give me like a jersey of yours. Well, I'd probably go end up buying your jersey anyways because you just hit your first career home run and I caught it. But
yeah,
like, if I was ever in a negotiation period, I'd be like, listen, man, I just want to be the one to hand it back to the guy. That's the only thing I'm looking for.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of thing is so much more special in the hands of the person who made that debut than if you were just there, just like hanging out, caught it. I would absolutely go give it back to somebody because I have kind of a perspective, and so do you, and so does most people who play that's super important. It is tough to make it
Yeah.
to the big leagues, and if you hit a first big league home run, I'm encouraging everybody to give that ball back to that guy. And you see it too, even on base hits. The guys make their debut, and they'll either a pitcher or a hitter. If you're a pitcher, you make your debut, you get your first strikeout, that ball goes right into the dugout. Somebody grabs
Yeah,
it,
that's
makes sure
right.
to give it to you, or even like a base hit. Outfielder throws it in, they throw it to the first base coach. Here you go, right? Or roll it in the dugout, and there's your first big league hit, and that's you got the ball for it. There's no other souvenir in any other sport like a baseball, just because it's so diverse in what it could come from and what story it has.
That's a very good point. And I mean, that actually comes to mind as far as the ones that I've collected too. I have the baseball that I walked off the mound with when I came back from Tommy John surgery. That was one that I held on to. And I've got my last ever like competitive inning, like my final outing. It was a ninth inning. I think we won a game by like 4 or 5 runs, but we had about 3 games left in the season. And the catcher was a freshman in college, Cody Kelly. Shout out to Cody Kelly. He's at Missouri State University right now. So I remember him. My final pitch that I threw in that setting was a strikeout. He catches it, and then he comes out to me, and I think he knew at that point because I told a few kids on the team, and they kind of recognized that this was the end of the road for me. Of it's time for me to move on. And I remember seeing the look in his eyes, and he just was smiling, and he said, "Hold on to this." He put it in my glove, and that ended up being I still have that baseball to this day, and I think of that could have just been a standard BP ball that never even found its way into the stands, and so. Yeah, I got it tucked away. It's hanging. It's not this one, although it probably should be this one. This is just another random minor league ball that I think I found outside a spring training complex. So maybe I should put a sentimental ball right there. I need to get on your level with the 2020 stamp.
I'll see if I can find you one. If I can find more, I'll definitely give you one. I don't know where the heck they would be though,
Oh my
but
God.
I think what's interesting too is one thing we forget to mention is how much feel catchers have with this scenario with pitchers
That's a good point. Yeah.
and how they know. I remember there was one kid that played the minor leagues with me. He's a great guy, and he knew he was going to be done playing, and he knew when his final outing was before he even stepped on the mound. So it was a really, really emotional moment, and it was in the middle of the game, right? And he threw his last pitch, and I'm pretty sure it was a strikeout. And the catcher, instead of rolling it back out to the mound, catches it and puts it in his pocket, right? And then he comes in the dugout and he's tearing up, because it's his last game he's ever going to play. And the catcher gives him
Oh
the
man.
baseball, and him having that baseball was so important. And the catcher knowing not to just roll it back out there, because if he did, I would imagine he would have left it because he doesn't want to walk back out and grab the ball. But the umpire's looking at the catcher like, aren't you going to toss it back out there? And he's like, oh, okay, all right, I guess he's keeping it. And catchers have a lot of feel with that. A lot of times after saves, you might not notice this, but the catcher will give the ball to a pitcher on an important save when they come out to shake hands after the game's over.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. I know a catcher, Houston Street. He was with the Angels and with the Rockies, and he bounced around a handful of different teams. There was actually a story of every single save that he had recorded up to at least a certain point in his career, he had the baseball from. And there was one particular instance that maybe a baseball, it was like a fly ball to the outfield to end the game, and the outfielder tossed it into the stands. Well, Houston Street put on Twitter kind of asking, saying, "Hey, I've had every ball to this point. Like, is there? I'll do it. I'll happily do a trade for the baseball." And however many saves he had, I mean, it was probably well north of 100. And he said, "I don't know what I'm going to do with these baseballs at the end of my career, but it's something that I've made a habit of actually doing." So, anyways, he got in touch with the people that had the baseball. Like, they messaged him back, and all of a sudden he's having a lengthy exchange, and they came to the ballpark. And he told them, "You know what? How about you guys keep this one? Because the story of when I eventually, whatever I'm going to do with these, if I line these up, if there's a hole in the actual collection where this one, I don't know, 174 or whatever it was, the hole in the collection is going to mean more to him than having the actual ball, because he's now going to remember the essence of he did everything he could to get the ball back, and he satisfied that, but now the story of the missing one from the collection means so much more." And then if you're the one that actually got that baseball, you feel pretty good about it, going, "I'm actually an integral part of what this big leaguer liked to do and what this collection ended up meaning to him." So it's amazing to see. I mean, you talk about the different swarms of if there's a notable home run baseball, whether it's a single season or an all-time record. I think the infamous swarm after a baseball was Barry Bonds, when he hit 756 to pass Hank Aaron, and you just see a mosh pit in right center field in San Francisco of people going after this. But it's interesting to follow along with, a Major League Baseball, what the end life of the ball could potentially be, whether that's just finding its way into the batting practice bucket or finding its way into a glass case for whatever the significance can be. That's again part of the lure, and I mean the sentimental value of what truly does exist in this game. And I think that's why so many people look so poetically upon the game of baseball, and it's because of the actual tangible things that exist like this that can make you feel special in any given capacity. So, that's one thing that I encourage any baseball player never to really lose sight of, because I mean, there could be somebody that's watching you for the first time ever and maybe the last time ever, that their impression of you is going to be formulated on that one occasion, which, yes, it's kind of daunting when you think about that, but also to recognize how one small moment can mean such a big thing for somebody where it could just be another everyday moment for you. I think of when you start realizing the end game of these different levels of impact and what it means for different people. There's some pretty cool instances that come out of this game, and that's why we want to give the public forum on this show to be able to share those and to be able to highlight the good that comes out of it. So, baseballs, man. It's crazy to think that a ball itself can get that done, but here we are.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that everything you just said right there sums it up perfectly. The what can happen to a baseball that comes out of the paper could end up in the BP bucket. It could end up in some kids ball bucket at home, or it could end up in a glass case in Cooperstown for hundreds of years. So I think you summed it up pretty good. I honestly think that should be the end cap of this episode.
Well, there we go. I'll take what I can get, man. I mean, you never know what you're going to run into. And in the meantime, I'll replace this one with one that means a little bit more to me. So there we go. Well, we'll toss this thing out of the way and then we'll replace it on the next episode. Well, I'm going to have to interlude. I don't know if I actually have like the sentimental baseballs to me here. Like, because I mean, I've moved around and I think most of them are still at my parents' house, which I'll go digging. If all goes well, we'll have the rotating plyo as part of my backdrop, and then we'll have the sentimental baseball, and then we'll see how it goes. But we'll spice it up a little bit, and then the next thing you know, somebody else will be building their backdrop that's just as special to them, and that's the fun of this game. That's how it works, man. So, episode 6: baseball gloves, baseballs, 2 things that you can hold with you, 2 things that you can carry around, 2 things that you can have a blast with. So, with that being said. Yeah, here we are. No, I know that this is always kind of a fun thing to look at, and it's interesting to follow along. The impact that we're looking to really cultivate through this show is these exact stories of what you're going to find, what you're going to run into, and the people that you're going to meet along the way. So when you start looking at those things with the sentimental value, not just the actual physical things, but the relationships that are developed. And that's why Evan and I wanted to host this show to begin with. So go find whatever it is that means that value to you, whatever you can cultivate that ambition and enthusiasm with. And we're going to be right here trying to do the same exact thing through this show that you continue to tune into. And we are so very grateful for that. Check us out on the social media channels, same ones that we've been mentioning throughout the course of these episodes. Thank you guys for staying on top of the YouTube feed that we've got. And we've got some guests coming up. Word on the street is it's going to be a couple added voices that are making their way into the night pitch. So stay tuned on the upwards progress that we continue to make and the people that we're going to meet along the way as we continue taking to the night pitch to the people. This has been episode 6. Evan, my friend, thanks for joining us yet again.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, wait, before we go.
Episode 6 coming to a close.
Before we go, happy birthday to this guy.
Goodness.
Right here.
Oh, jeez.
Happy
Getting
birthday
old sucks, man.
to him.
It is what it is. 27. Scary business, man. No place I would rather spend the birthday than hanging out with the brethren, enjoying the day. Evan, thank you, my friend. Don't get old, because it's scary. I feel like my velocity is just going to naturally decline from here on out, so that's kind of the scary part. But you know what? We'll make the most out of what we got left, and we'll continue bringing it to you guys, so you guys can continue the upward climb and whatever it is. Night Pitch episode 6, Evan Johnson, Justin Wick. More episodes coming your way throughout the week. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.